The evening sun slanted through the blinds of my office, streaking the desk with streaks of golden light. I flipped through the last of the day's papers, but my thoughts kept returning to Priscilla. She'd looked so tired yesterday when she'd stopped by to pick up the keys to the guest bedroom, her belly so big and her eyes so lost. Said the doctor warned her about possible premature labor this week. Dr. Randall is known for his caution. He won't scare a patient without good reason. The construction equipment in the warehouse outside the window stood in straight rows: bulldozers, excavators, small cranes. 30 years ago, I started out with one tractor and a shed I rented from old man McPherson for $50 a month. Now I have the largest rental firm in Slaughter Beach, my own 15-acre lot, and a client base from Atlantic City to Cape May. Corbin always said it was a family business, though in all the time he'd worked here, he'd shown only bad judgment. He was late, rude to customers, thought he owed everyone just because he was my son. In recent months, his behavior has become particularly odd. Before, Corbin at least pretended to work, came to 9, sat in his office, pretended to be busy with documents. Now he showed up at 11, and by 3 he was about to leave on some urgent business. He was reluctant to answer questions, constantly checking the phone, and when customers called, he would pass the receiver to me or Doris, the secretary. It was as if he was no longer interested in business. Doris had worked for us for 12 years and knew everyone by sight. Last week she mentioned that she'd seen Corbin at lunchtime at the Sunset Cafe with a young girl. Blonde-haired, mid-20s, very smartly dressed. They were sitting in a far corner talking passionately about something. Doris decided to come over to say hello, but Corbin didn't notice her. He was too absorbed in his conversation with his companion. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, Corbin has friends, acquaintances from school, perhaps met someone on business matters. But now, remembering his behavior over the last few months, I was beginning to doubt it. Especially strange was the way he was treating Priscilla. Before, they had seemed like a contented couple, not passionately in love, but quietly attached to each other. Priscilla had always been a quiet, homely girl, the kind of girl who creates coziness and does not require unnecessary attention. Corbin appreciated this, often said that he was lucky to have a wife. But something had changed since the beginning of the pregnancy. At first, I wrote it off to the natural excitement of the future father, hormonal fluctuations in the wife, domestic troubles. Young spouses are always difficult to adapt to new circumstances. However, the more Priscilla's belly grew, the colder Corbin became. He stopped taking an interest in her well-being, did not go with her to the doctor's office, even sent alone to the ultrasound. When she tried to talk to him about a name for the baby or the baby's room, he answered in one-word answers and quickly changed the subject. It was 7:30 on the clock. Usually Corbin would have gotten home by this time, not because he was taking care of his pregnant wife, but because his workday ended at 5. But today his car hadn't been in the parking lot for hours. I remembered him leaving the office around 2, saying he was on his way to meet with a potential client about a long-term equipment lease. He didn't specify which client, although he usually discussed all large contracts with me. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. First ring, second, third. Corbin didn't like to be distracted, but this was about family. Finally, he answered, but his voice sounded distant, like I'd pulled him away from something much more important. "Yeah, Dad. What's wrong?" "Where are you? It's almost 7, and you're not in the office." "Yeah, busy right now. I'm taking care of some business." There were voices in the background, music, dishes clinking. Definitely a restaurant or a cafe, and a busy one at that. It was strange. There were only 4 decent places in Slaughter Beach, and I knew them all by heart. The Anchor by the pier, Sunset on Main Street, the Clam near the beach, and the Italian Bella Vita downtown. But the sounds seemed unfamiliar, more exotic and fun than our local eateries. The music, too, was somehow unusual, Latin American, with guitars and maracas. "What questions? And why didn't you tell me you were leaving work early?" "Dad, I'm not in high school. I can decide when I leave." There was a familiar note of irritation in his voice. Corbin was always angry when I tried to control his work, but he was paid above the regional average and considered the business his future inheritance. As a child, he often said, "When I own the firm, things will be different." At the time, it seemed like a cute, childish boast, but over the years, it turned into a conviction that his father's success belonged to him by birthright. How's Priscilla feeling? She didn't look so good yesterday. She's fine. It's just a pregnancy. What's the big deal? The indifference in his voice struck me. 6 months ago, Corbin had worried about her every ailment, taking her to the doctor at the slightest suspicion of trouble. Now he was talking about the upcoming birth as if it were a routine medical procedure that had nothing to do with him. Corbin, she's due any day now. You're supposed to be there for her, not... I don't owe anyone anything. His voice became harsh, almost aggressive. She's a grown woman. She can handle it without a nanny. I felt something inside me clench with anger and frustration. In 35 years of life, my son had never learned to take responsibility for his actions and take care of his loved ones. As a child, I'd written it off as spoiled. Maybe I'd allowed him too much after his mother died. As a young man, I hoped that the army or college would teach him discipline and responsibility, but he had shirked service for medical reasons and had only lasted a year and a half at university. Now that he himself was about to have a child, this indifference to his wife seemed not just selfish, but cruel. Son, I don't know what's happening to you. Priscilla's carrying your baby, and you act like it's none of your business. It does, Dad. I just have other priorities right now. What other priorities? What's more important than family? Long pause. The background sounds grew louder. Someone laughing in a high-pitched female voice. Rhythmic music with Spanish lyrics. Definitely not our quiet seaside town of 8,000 people. What's more, the sounds were festive, resort-like. Like Corbin was on vacation, not dealing with work issues as he claimed. Look, I can't talk right now. I'll call you back later. Corbin, hold on. But he'd already disconnected. I stared at the phone, trying to figure out what was going on. The sounds in the receiver definitely didn't sound like Slaughter Beach, or even the neighboring towns. The music was too exotic, the atmosphere too fun and carefree for a business dinner. And why did Corbin cut the conversation off so abruptly when I asked about priorities? In 30 years in business, I've learned to read people by voice and behavior. When clients tried to cheat me out of payment, contractors hid equipment problems, and partners broke agreements, they all showed the same signs. Evasive answers, avoiding direct questions, trying to change the subject. That's exactly how my son was acting right now. But what could he be hiding? And why now, when my wife was about to give birth to our first grandchild? I got home about 8:30. Usually by this time I had turned on the TV, warmed up dinner, and read the local paper at the kitchen table. The habits of a widower that had developed over the last 15 years since Mary's death. But tonight he couldn't concentrate on anything. His thoughts kept returning to the strange conversation with Corbin. That music on the phone, the laughter of strangers, his unwillingness to explain where he was or what he was doing. I dialed my son's number several times, but the phone was unavailable. It was suspicious, too. Corbin didn't usually disconnect, too fond of being the center of attention and receiving calls from friends. Around 9, he decided to drive over to his house to check on Priscilla. After all, if the husband was missing wherever he was, someone had to take care of a pregnant woman in her last term. Corbin and Priscilla rented a small house on Maple Street, a 10-minute drive from my place. It was a 2-story structure built before the war, with a porch and a small garden. Mrs. Patterson, the landlady, kept fair prices and didn't interfere with the tenants. The young family could have bought something of their own, but Corbin constantly postponed the issue, citing either unsuitable offers or the instability of the real estate market. In the windows of the first floor, light was burning, which meant Priscilla at home. Corbin's car wasn't in the driveway, though he was usually home from work by this time. I went up on the porch and knocked on the door. A few seconds of silence, then slow footsteps and a cautious, "Who is it?" "It's me, Clarence. May I come in?" The door opened, and I saw Priscilla in her robe, pale and disheveled. Her belly seemed huge on her frail figure, and there were dark circles of fatigue under her eyes. She tried to smile, but it was strained. "Hello, Clarence. Come in, please." "How are you feeling? Is Corbin home?" "No, he said he'd be late for work. Some important negotiations." The lie sounded lame. Priscilla's never been a good liar. Too honest and straightforward a girl. She grew up in a religious family that valued traditional virtues, loyalty, modesty, willingness to sacrifice for her family. It was these qualities that had attracted Corbin to her, though he now seemed to find them boring and burdensome. Priscilla, I was under the impression that Corbin was not in Slaughter Beach. When I called him, there was some unusual music in the background, unfamiliar voices. She looked away and brushed her hair back awkwardly. There was something protective in the gesture, as if she were trying to hide from uncomfortable questions. Maybe he was meeting clients at some restaurant. You know, sometimes business negotiations are informal. At 7 p.m.? Then why didn't he tell me about this meeting? I usually know about all the big deals. Priscilla was silent, rubbing the waistband of her robe with nervous fingers. I could see she was hiding something, but I didn't want to put pressure on a pregnant woman. Perhaps there were some rifts between the couple that didn't concern outsiders, not even relatives. Do you want me to make you some tea? You look tired. Thank you, Clarence. That's very kind of you. We went into the kitchen and I put the kettle on. Priscilla sank into a chair with a heavy sigh, holding her belly with both hands. The last weeks of pregnancy are always hard. Mary was in agony before Corbin's delivery too, complaining of back pain and insomnia. Did the doctor say anything new today? I haven't been to the doctor. Corbin was supposed to take me to my appointment, but this morning he said he had an emergency. That surprised me. Dr. Randall scheduled weekly checkups in the last month of pregnancy, and Corbin knew that. Missing a doctor's appointment on the eve of labor was irresponsible and stupid. Why didn't you go alone or ask me for a ride? Corbin said it wasn't necessary, that if anything happened, we could always go to the hospital. I felt a flash of anger at my son. To ignore the doctor's advice to leave my wife without medical supervision before giving birth was not just thoughtlessness, but a blatant disregard for her health and the baby's safety. Priscilla, we'll go to Dr. Randall tomorrow. I'll drive you myself if Corbin is busy with his business again. I don't want to bother you. You're not bothering anybody. You're carrying my grandson. It's my duty to look after you. The kettle boiled, and I poured the water into cups. Priscilla gratefully accepted the hot drink and relaxed a little. We sat in silence for a few minutes, then she asked cautiously, Clarence, do you think Corbin is ready to be a father? The question took me by surprise. Usually Priscilla avoided talking about personal problems, especially those involving her husband. Now there was an anxiety in her voice that she could no longer hide. Cicero, what do you mean? He's changed so much in the last few months. He used to be interested in the pregnancy, buying books on child development, talking about plans for the future. Now it's like he's avoiding all conversation about it. I didn't know what to say. Should I tell her about my suspicions about Corbin's behavior, or try to reassure her, citing the father-to-be's natural anxiety? Either way, a pregnant woman shouldn't be unnecessarily nervous. Many men are frightened by the responsibility of having their first child. Maybe Corbin's just trying to deal with the stress in his own way. Maybe you're right, but I could see that my attempt at consolation didn't convince her. Priscilla knew her husband too well to believe in simple explanations for his strange behavior. At 10:30, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I recognized the voice at once, Priscilla, only much more tense and frightened. Clarence, help me, please. What's wrong? Where are you? At home. I started having contractions an hour ago, and now they're really strong. I've been trying to call Corbin, but his phone's not available. My heart is failing. Labor had started, and my son was nowhere to be found. I grabbed my car keys and rushed to the door. Hang on, I'll be right there. Get your things for the hospital. I already did. My bag's in the hallway. It took me 7 minutes to get to Maple Street instead of the usual 10, speeding and ignoring the stop signs. At Priscilla's house, I braked so hard that the tires shrieked on the pavement. She was waiting for me on the porch, clutching a small travel bag. Her face was pale and her breathing was ragged. Between contractions, she tried to smile, but I could see she was in a lot of pain and scared. How often are the contractions? Every 5 minutes, and they're getting stronger. I helped her into the car and carefully fastened her seatbelt. St. Mary's Hospital was a 20-minute drive from the city, but on the way I tried calling Corbin again. The number was unavailable, as it had been all evening. Maybe he's just in a bad coverage area. Priscilla suggested, noticing my irritation. Maybe, But I knew it wasn't true. In Slaughter Beach and the surrounding area, cellular service worked without interruption. If the phone was unavailable, it meant either it was turned off intentionally or Corbin was very far away from home. At the hospital, we were met by the nurse on duty, an older woman with kind but tired eyes. She quickly did the paperwork and escorted Priscilla to the labor and delivery room. I stayed in the hallway, continuing to call my son and leaving messages on my answering machine. An hour later, Dr. Randall came out, a man in his 50s with a gray beard and a serious expression. I'd known him for years. He'd delivered half the women in Slaughter Beach. "Clarence, good to see you. Where's Corbin?" "I've been trying to reach him." He was in the middle of something when the contractions started. The doctor frowned. He didn't like it when husbands were absent during labor. Thought it was irresponsible and selfish. The labor would be difficult. Priscilla has a narrow pelvis and the baby is quite large. We may need a C-section. Is she in danger? Not yet, but we need to monitor the situation. It's a good thing you got her here in time. Another hour at home, and there could have been complications. I imagined what would have happened if Priscilla had given birth alone in a rented house without help or support. The thought made me sick to my stomach. In the emergency room at St. Mary's, time stretched agonizingly slow. Fluorescent lights cast a cold glow on the plastic chairs where several people sat, an elderly man with a bandaged arm, a middle-aged woman nervously flipping through a magazine, and a young couple whispering quietly. I paced the hallway, dialing Corbin's number every 10 minutes and getting the same answering machine message. The caller is temporarily unavailable. Dr. Randall appeared every half hour, giving me an update on the progress of the labor. The contractions were getting stronger, but the cervix was opening slower than she would have liked. Priscilla was doing well, not complaining of pain, but she kept asking about her husband. Every time I visited her between contractions, she hoped to see Corbin behind me. "Had he arrived yet?" she asked in a weak voice, lying in the hospital bed. "Not yet, darling. But I left him a few messages and he'll call back." Lying was hard for me, but what else could I tell a woman in labor? That her husband was unknown whereabouts and not answering the phone at the most important moment of their lives? Around 11, a panting girl of about 25 with red curly hair and a freckled face burst into the hospital. She wore jeans and a sweater, clearly dressed in a hurry. At the front desk, she started making quick inquiries of the nurse, waving her arms and speaking loud enough for me to hear. "Priscilla Tibbet. She's my best friend. I found out she's in labor." The nurse said something, and the girl headed in my direction. I recognized her. Tessa Cromwell, Priscilla's friend since high school. They met often, going shopping and to the movies. Corbin didn't particularly like Tessa, thought she was too chatty and nosy. "Mr. Tibbet," Tessa came running up to me, relieved. "How's Priscilla? Am I all right? The labor's been difficult, but the doctors say it's under control for now." "How did you know that?" "She called me about 2 hours ago, said she was having contractions. I was at my parents' house in Cape May, so I came straight here." "Where's Corbin?" The question came with a peculiar intonation, not surprise, but rather suspicion. It was as if Tessa had expected that Corbin might not be with his laboring wife. "He got held up at work. I've been trying to call him, but he's not available." Tessa looked at me with a strange look, then sat down in a nearby chair and was silent for a while. I could see that she was struggling with herself, deciding whether to say something or not. "Mr. Tibbet," she said at last in a low voice, "I have something to tell you. About Corbin." My heart sank. I could tell from Tessa's tone that it was about something unpleasant, something I knew but didn't want to admit. What was it? He'd been seeing Vivian Preston for months, the daughter of the realtor who sold you the warehouse 5 years ago. She works at the Sun Road Travel Agency on Ocean Avenue. The information hit like a bolt of lightning. Vivian Preston. I remembered her vaguely, a pretty blonde girl of about 23 who had come into my father's office a few times on some family business. Tall, slender, dressed bright and modern, the complete opposite of the quiet, homely Priscilla. "How do you know that?" "I've seen them together many times. In restaurants, at the mall, once even kissing in a car by the beach. Priscilla doesn't know anything. I didn't dare tell her, especially when I found out she was pregnant." "How long has this been going on?" 4 months, maybe more. At first, I thought it was just a friendship or a business relationship, but then it became clear that there was something serious between them. I tried to digest that information. So, the affair began while Priscilla was pregnant, when she was in particular need of her husband's support and care. Corbin wasn't just cheating on her, he was betraying her at the most vulnerable time in her life. Tessa, why are you telling me this now? Because I saw them getting on a plane this afternoon. A plane? Where? I'm not sure, but I heard Vivian talking to someone on the phone about a hotel reservation in Cancun for 3 days. That's in Mexico. Mexico. The Latin American music I heard in the background when I was talking to Corbin, the cheerful voices, the festive atmosphere, it all fit together into a horrible picture of betrayal. Are you sure it was them? Positive. I work at the Atlantic City Airport, checking passengers in for domestic flights. I saw them in the lounge around 3 in the afternoon. Corbin was buying Vivian a cocktail at the bar, laughing and hugging. Looked like a couple in love going on a romantic trip. I felt a cold rage brewing inside. While his pregnant wife was preparing for childbirth, my son had gone on vacation with his mistress, left Priscilla alone at the most crucial moment, without even bothering to warn her of his plans. Why didn't you tell Priscilla? I wanted to, but, she was so excited about the pregnancy, making plans with Corbin. I couldn't destroy her world, especially in her condition. I hoped the affair would end on its own, that Corbin would come to his senses before the baby was born. Tessa cried, and I realized how hard it had been for her to keep that secret for months, to see her best friend suffering, to know why her husband was cooling off, but not be able to help. You did the right thing in telling me, I said, handing her a handkerchief. Priscilla doesn't need to know yet. We'll deal with it after the birth. At that moment, a nurse came out of the delivery room and headed toward us. Priscilla Tibbet's family? Yes, that's us, I answered, rising from my chair. The woman in labor is asking you to come up. Her contractions have become very painful, and she is worried about the absence of her husband. We walked down the long corridor to the room where Priscilla was lying. She looked exhausted and frightened, her hair stuck to her sweaty forehead, and her eyes glistened feverishly. Between contractions, she grabbed my hand and asked, Clarence, where's Corbin? Why isn't he coming? I'm so afraid to go into labor without him. He'll be here soon, darling. He's probably stuck in traffic or having car trouble. But it's our baby. How can he miss a moment like this? Tessa sat down on the other side of the bed and took Priscilla's other hand. Don't worry, we're with you. The important thing right now is to think about the baby. Call him again, please. Priscilla was in another contraction, and she squeezed my hand so hard that her knuckles turned white. I went out into the hallway and dialed my son's number again. This time the answering machine didn't even come on. Just long beeps, meaning the phone was off or out of range. It was deep night in Mexico now. Corbin was probably sleeping in a hotel with his mistress, not even realizing his wife was in labor. I left another voicemail, trying not to give away the anger in my voice. Corbin, this is an emergency. Priscilla's in labor and we're at St. Mary's. The doctors are talking about possible complications. Call me back immediately. Back in the room, I saw that Priscilla's condition had worsened. Her contractions had become more frequent and painful, and her blood pressure was dangerously high. Dr. Randall frowned as he studied the readings. Mr. Tibbet, we need to do an emergency C-section. The baby is in distress, and the woman is going into preeclampsia. Do what you need to do, doctor. Where's the patient's husband? Surgery requires the consent of the next of kin? I'm his father. I'm authorized to sign the papers? Yes, of course. Priscilla was taken to the operating room, and I stayed in the hallway with Tessa, who was quietly crying into her fist. Now that my wife and child's lives were in danger, Corbin's absence seemed not just irresponsible, but criminal. What kind of man abandons his family for a love affair? Mr. Tibbet, Tessa said quietly, I heard Vivian tell a friend that Corbin had promised to marry her after he divorced Priscilla. He said it was a mistake to marry her, that he deserved to be happy with a woman who understood him. Those words finally hit me. So Corbin wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was planning to leave her and their newborn child for a young mistress. All the while, Priscilla was rejoicing in her pregnancy and preparing for motherhood. He was plotting the destruction of their family. 35 years ago, I held my newborn son in my arms and dreamed of the man he would grow up to be. I envisioned him working with me in business, starting his own family, raising my grandchildren. I never thought Corbin would be capable of such a betrayal of those closest to him. The lights were bright in the operating room, and I could see the silhouettes of doctors in green coats through the glass door. Somewhere there, on the operating table, lay a girl who trusted my son with her life and future. And he was having fun with his mistress in a Mexican resort, not even realizing what his family was going through. The surgery lasted 2 hours. I spent that time in the emergency room, alternately pacing the hallway and sitting in a hard plastic chair, staring at the wall. Tessa dozed curled up on a nearby chair, occasionally sobbing in her sleep. In the silence of the hospital, every sound seemed deafening. The creak of the medication cart, the muffled voices of the nurses, the distant cry of a baby in the pediatric ward. Every half hour I dialed Corbin's number, but the phone was still unavailable. It was now about 1 o'clock in the morning, local time in Mexico. Maybe he was asleep and hadn't heard the calls, or had deliberately turned off his phone so that a romantic vacation with his mistress wouldn't be overshadowed. The more I thought about it, the more anger flared. 35 years ago, when Mary went into labor, I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. She'd been in labor for almost 12 hours, and I hadn't left her side for a minute. I held her hand, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and spoke encouraging words. Even when the doctors said there was a risk to the life of the mother and child, I stayed by her side. Because that's what a real man does. Protect his family, not run away at the first sign of trouble. Corbin had grown up without a mother since he was 8 years old, and I may have spoiled him too much in an attempt to compensate for the loss. Buying expensive toys, letting him skip school, turning a blind eye to bad grades. When teachers complained about his behavior, I justified my son's loss in difficult circumstances. Maybe that's when he realized that he could avoid responsibility for his actions if he found the right excuses. Corbin got into trouble several times in his youth. Fights at school, drunk driving, petty shoplifting. Every time I helped him out, paid fines, negotiated with the victims, hired lawyers. I told myself that I was helping my son to get on the right path, but in reality, I was just teaching him impunity. He was used to thinking that Daddy would always come to the rescue and solve any problem. When Corbin met Priscilla, I was delighted. A quiet, homely girl from a good family seemed just what my easygoing son needed. She could stabilize him, teach him responsibility, and how to care for his loved ones. Their wedding 3 years ago was modest but beautiful. Priscilla was radiant with happiness, and Corbin looked in love and content with life. The first 2 years of marriage, everything went well. The young couple rented a small house. Priscilla worked in a kindergarten. Corbin more or less regularly appeared in the office. They talked about plans to buy their own place, have children, maybe go to Europe. The usual dreams of a young family, nothing special, but sincere and realizable. When Priscilla became pregnant last year, Corbin was initially excited. He bought books on child development, converted the guest room into a nursery, and told his friends about his impending fatherhood. I thought at the time that having a baby would finally make him a responsible adult man. How wrong I was. The change started around the 5th month of pregnancy. Corbin became irritable and absent-minded, spending less time at home, more often delayed at work for no apparent reason. When Priscilla complained about toxemia or asked to help with household chores, he responded sharply and reluctantly. He attributed his behavior to stress at work and worries about the future. But I could see that it was something else. Now, knowing the truth about his affair with Vivian Preston, I understood the reasons for his changed behavior. A young, beautiful mistress with no commitments or problems seemed more attractive than a pregnant wife with her whims and demands for attention. Corbin had always taken the easy way out, and caring for the expectant mother of his own child was too burdensome for his selfish nature. Around 3 in the morning, Dr. Randall emerged from the operating room, removing his surgical gloves. The expression on his face was tired but satisfied, the kind of look that doctors get after a successful complex operation. "Clarence, congratulations. You have a grandson. A boy, 3 pounds, 400 grams, healthy." A wave of relief washed over me. I didn't even realize how tense I'd been during the wait, clenching my fists and clenching my teeth. Now all my muscles relaxed at once, and I felt weak in my legs. And Priscilla? She's stable. The operation went without complications. In a few hours, she'll regain consciousness. However, recovery will be long. A cesarean section is a serious surgical intervention. Can I see the baby? Sure. He's in the pediatric ward. The nurse will show you. Tessa woke up to our voices and sleepily inquired about the results. When she heard that the surgery was successful, she cried with joy and relief. We walked together to the pediatric ward, where behind a glass partition stood several beds with newborns. My grandson was easy to recognize. He was lying in the first crib on the right, sleeping soundly with tiny fists tucked under his chin. Black hair, long eyelashes, correct facial features. Very much like Corbin as a baby, only bigger and healthier. Beautiful boy, Tessa said quietly. Priscilla will be so happy when she sees him. I stood by the glass and looked at the sleeping baby, trying to cope with the emotions that were overwhelming me. Joy at the arrival of my grandson was mixed with anger at Corbin, who had missed the birth of his own son to have fun with his mistress. This boy deserved a better father, a man who would be there for him in difficult moments, protect him from danger, teach him to be honest and responsible. "What do you want to name him?" the nurse asked, ready to fill out the crib tag. "I don't know yet. We have to wait for Mommy to wake up and decide." "Where's Daddy? Fathers are usually the first ones to come and see the newborns." Dad's, on a business trip. He'll be back soon." Lying was getting harder and harder. Soon the whole town would know that Corbin Tibbet had missed the birth of his son, and I would have to answer uncomfortable questions from neighbors and acquaintances. At 4 in the morning, I decided to make another attempt to call Corbin. It was now 2 in the morning in Mexico. Perhaps he would wake up to the phone call and finally answer. I stepped out into the hospital parking lot so no one could hear the conversation and dialed a familiar number. This time a miracle happened. After the 5th ringtone, Corbin answered. His voice was sleepy and disgruntled, with a background of movement in the bed and a woman's voice. "Who is it, baby?" "I don't know, I'll look," Corbin mumbled. "Hello, who's speaking?" "Corbin, it's Dad. Where the hell are you?" Dad." The voice is clearer, but still irritated. "What's wrong? What time is it?" "Priscilla went into labor. We've been in the hospital for 5 hours doing a C-section. Where are you?" There was a long pause. You could hear Corbin get out of bed and move away from the sleeping woman. "Shit, it's already started? I thought we had another week to go." "Another week? You knew labor could start at any moment. The doctor warned me about premature labor." "Yeah, I did. I didn't think it would be so soon." There was no excitement in Corbin's voice, no concern for his wife and child. He sounded as if he were talking about a minor domestic incident that had disrupted his plans a bit. "Corbin, where are you? Why haven't you been answering your cell phone?" "I'm in, Philadelphia, meeting with potential investors about expanding the business." My cell phone was dead and I left the charger at home. The lie was so brazen I felt a surge of rage. Even now that he'd been caught red-handed, Corbin was still lying. "Don't lie to me. I know you're in Mexico with Vivian Preston." Another pause, longer. Corbin was apparently deciding whether to continue the pretense or come clean. In the end, he chose to come clean, but in such a cynical way that I shuddered with indignation. "So what? I have a right to a private life, don't I?" "A private life? You're married. Your wife is having a baby and you're having fun with your mistress." "Dad, don't get hysterical. Priscilla is a grown woman. She can manage without a babysitter. The doctors know what they're doing. It's a routine delivery." "Routine? She had an emergency C-section for complications. She could have died." "But she didn't," Corbin said indifferently. "So she's fine." I couldn't believe my ears. My son spoke of his wife's possible death as if it were a broken fingernail or a broken teacup. No emotion, no sympathy, just cold calculation. "Corbin, you had a son, a big boy, 3 pounds, 400 grams. Aren't you interested?" "Of course I'm interested. How's the kid?" "The kid? It's your child, your son. And he's in the hospital without his father because his father decided to go on vacation with his girlfriend." "Look, Dad, don't get so worked up. I had no way of knowing the labor would start now. I was planning to be back the day after tomorrow, just in time for the due date." And if you hadn't, what if you'd gone into labor earlier than you expected? Well, then you'd have backed me up, like you did today. You managed without my help, didn't you? Backed me up was the word that particularly struck me. Corbin saw the birth of his own child as an inconvenient obligation that could be shifted onto other people's shoulders. In his mind, I was supposed to take care of his pregnant wife, and he was entitled to enjoy life unencumbered. Corbin, do you realize what you're saying? Priscilla is your wife, not mine. The child is yours, not mine. It's your responsibility. Oh yes, responsibility, there was a sneer in his voice. What if I'm not ready for that responsibility? What if I want to live for myself? You should have thought of that before you got married, before my wife got pregnant. Maybe, but it's too late to change, isn't it? The kids are born, the wedding's over. Now all we have to do is adapt to the circumstances. The cynicism in his words was breathtaking. Corbin spoke of family and fatherhood as an unfortunate mistake that had to be put up with, as if wife and child were a bad investment you couldn't get rid of. When are you coming home? The night after tomorrow, like I planned. I've already bought the tickets. I won't change them. Corbin, your wife is in the hospital after a major operation. Your newborn son needs his father. How can you even think about taking a vacation at a time like this? Dad, what can I do in the hospital? Sit in the hallway, hold your hand? Priscilla's asleep from the anesthesia. The baby's asleep. My presence won't make a difference. This isn't about practicality. It's about being there for your family in their time of need. Should, must, obligation, responsibility. Dad, you sound like my old Sunday school teacher. Life isn't black and white. It's nuanced. Corbin, baby, come back to bed. It's cold without you. Right away, darling, Corbin replied in the gentle tone he'd never used with Priscilla. Then he turned to me again. Dad, I have to finish. Vivian is freezing. Corbin, wait. There's something else I have to tell you. We'll talk in the morning. It's too late for serious talk now. No, not in the morning. Now. You've been avoiding responsibility for too long, and I've let you do it. But that's all changed now. What do you mean? There was a note of alarm in my voice for the first time. Corbin was used to my indulgence in his antics and didn't expect serious consequences. You'll see when you get home. I disconnected the phone, shaking with rage and disgust. The son I had loved and pampered for 35 years had turned out to be a callous egoist, incapable of basic compassion for those closest to him. He betrayed his pregnant wife at the most crucial moment, lied to my face, and did not even try to justify his behavior. What's more, he expected me to continue to cover up his antics and solve his problems at his expense. After my conversation with Corbin, I stood in the hospital parking lot for a long time, trying to calm down. The night air was cool and humid, smelling of salt from the nearby ocean. Streetlights illuminated a few parked cars, doctors and nurses working the night shift. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the occasional noise of passing cars came from the highway. The usual sounds of a quiet seaside town, but now they seemed foreign and distant. My son's cynicism shook me to the core. In 35 years, I thought I knew Corbin, understood his character and motives. Yes, he has always been selfish and frivolous, but I considered it a flaw of youth, which will be corrected with age and experience. It turned out that I raised a monster, a man incapable of basic sympathy for loved ones. He spoke of the possible death of his wife as a minor nuisance, and the birth of his own child perceived as an annoying interference with his entertainment. Especially painful were his words that I should back him up with his family. Corbin was used to shifting his responsibilities to other people and considered it normal. In his mind, a father existed to solve his son's problems and take responsibility for his actions, and he himself had the right to enjoy life without unnecessary worries and obligations. I remembered how Corbin had often let his friends down as a child. He promised to come to a birthday party and didn't show up, agreed to play together and forgot about the arrangements. At the time, I thought it was just normal childhood absent-mindedness. Then there were school absences, which he explained by feeling unwell or family circumstances. In his youth, promises to get a job that never materialized. I always found excuses and gave him another chance to improve. Now I realize I made a huge mistake. Instead of teaching my son responsibility from a young age, I had allowed him to avoid the unpleasant consequences of his actions. Every time I forgave his cheating or thoughtlessness, I let him know that the rules didn't exist for him, that Daddy would always come to the rescue and solve any problems. By marrying Priscilla, Corbin apparently expected her to become another nanny who would take care of his comfort and demand nothing in return. For the first 2 years, it was so. A quiet, homely girl created a cozy, not capricious, did not make exaggerated demands. But pregnancy changed the situation. Priscilla needed attention, care, emotional support. That is exactly what Corbin did not know how to give and did not want. Romance with Vivian Preston was a logical continuation of his selfish nature. A young, beautiful girl with no commitments or problems seemed more attractive than a pregnant wife with her legitimate needs. Corbin had always taken the easy way out, and caring for a mother-to-be was too burdensome for his infantile mind. But the most disgusting thing about today's conversation was his confidence in his own impunity. Corbin had no doubt that I would continue to cover up his antics and solve his problems at his expense. That you could betray your wife on the day of childbirth, lie to your father's face, and be so callous to your newborn child and still expect your family to understand and support you. I got back to the hospital around 5 in the morning. Tessa was asleep in a chair, curled up in a ball and covered by my jacket. The hallways were quiet, the night shift was getting ready to finish work, and the day shift hadn't started their duties yet. Only in the children's ward were rare sounds heard: the cries of newborns, the quiet voices of nurses, the creaking of carts with baby food. The nurse on duty said that Priscilla was beginning to regain consciousness after anesthesia. You can come in to see her, but not for long. Her body is still weak. She needs rest to recover. I made my way to the recovery room where my sister-in-law was lying, pale and thin, with an IV in her arm and sensors on her chest. Her eyes were half closed, but when I sat down next to the bed, she turned her head in my direction and smiled weakly. "Clarence, is that you?" "Yes, darling. How are you feeling?" "I'm sore, stomach ache." "And the baby? What about the baby?" "It's fine. You have a son, a healthy, handsome boy. 3 kilograms, 400 grams. Tears flowed down her cheeks, from relief, joy, maternal happiness. She tried to rise, but I gently held her by the shoulders. "Lie still. Don't move. The doctor said you need complete rest." "Can I see him? I want to see my son." "Of course, but first you need to get stronger. They'll bring him in for feeding in a few hours." "And Corbin? Where's Corbin? Has he seen the baby?" The question I've been dreading. How do you explain to a woman who's just had major surgery that her husband left her for a mistress? That at the most important moment of their lives, he chose to party in a Mexican resort? Corbin. He'll be here soon. He got held up at work, but I reached out to him. Does he know we have a son? He does. He's very excited. It was a hard lie to tell, but what else could I say? Priscilla needed peace and positive emotions to recover, not the shock of the truth of her husband's betrayal. "What shall we name the boy?" she asked, squeezing my hand weakly. "That's for you and Corbin to decide. Discuss it when he gets back." I thought about the name Ethan. Corbin said he liked that name. Ethan. It's a beautiful, modern name, suitable for a grandson. Too bad this boy's father doesn't deserve such a fine son. Priscilla closed her eyes again, tired from the conversation and the medication. I sat next to her for another half hour, watching her steady breathing and trying not to think about what would happen when she learned the truth about her husband. What mattered for now was her recovery and the baby's health. The showdown with Corbin would wait until he returned from Mexico. At 6 in the morning, Ethan was brought in for his first feeding. The nurse gently placed the bundle in Priscilla's arms, who looked at her son and cried with happiness. The newborn was tiny and helpless, with a wrinkled red face and tightly closed eyes. Very much like Corbin as a baby, but seemed calmer and more peaceful. "How beautiful," Priscilla whispered, gently stroking the fluffy black hair. "Look, Clarence, how long his eyelashes are. He's a real beauty. He'll be a heartbreaker when he grows up." "Do you think he looks like Corbin?" "Very much so. Same chin, same eye shape." I didn't add that I sincerely hope he'll have a very different character, that he will grow up to be an honest, responsible man, capable of caring for his loved ones and taking responsibility for his actions, that he will not repeat his father's mistakes and will not hurt those who trust him. The feeding lasted about 20 minutes. Priscilla was weak and inexperienced, but her maternal instinct helped her find the right movements and positions. Ethan sucked the milk greedily and concentrated, occasionally opening his dark eyes and looking at the unfamiliar world around him. "He is so smart," the young mother admired. "Look how closely he studies my face. He recognizes his mother. Babies can sense their loved ones from birth." After feeding, Ethan was taken back to the pediatric ward, and Priscilla fell back into a therapeutic sleep. Medication and fatigue were taking their toll. Her body needed time to recover from the heavy surgery. Dr. Randall said that the first 24 hours were the most important. If there were no complications, then the normal healing process would go on. I went out into the hallway and tried to call Corbin again, but the phone was unavailable. He'd probably cut the connection again or was in a bad coverage area. Either way, there was no expectation of help or support from him. His son had made it clear that he was not interested in family responsibilities and that he intended to shift responsibility for his wife and child onto someone else's shoulders. It was then, standing in the hospital corridor, looking through the glass at my grandson sleeping, that I made the decision that had been brewing in me all night. Corbin didn't deserve the inheritance he thought was his by birthright. A man capable of betraying his family at the most crucial moment could not be the successor to the business to which I had given 30 years of my life. The business was built on the trust of clients, honesty in relations, fulfillment of obligations. How could a man who cheats on his wife and abandons his newborn son lead such a company? Corbin would sooner or later destroy everything I had built up over decades because he treated other people's interests as irresponsibly as he treated his own family responsibilities. Besides, I now had a grandson, little Ethan, who needed protection and care. If Corbin was going to leave his family for a young mistress, who would take care of the child's financial well-being? Priscilla worked in a kindergarten. Her salary was barely enough for personal expenses. Without her husband's support, she would not be able to provide her son with a decent future, education, medical care, the opportunity to develop talents and abilities. At 7 in the morning, I left Tessa on duty at the hospital and drove home. I had to take a shower, change my clothes, and take care of a few urgent matters. First and foremost was to contact Attorney Harris to discuss changes to the will. This decision could not be delayed because delay could cost Priscilla and Ethan dearly. Robert Harris had been my attorney for 15 years, an intelligent older man with an impeccable reputation and extensive experience in family law. He had drafted the will after Mary's death and had made minor changes to it several times as the business grew. The current version assumed that the entire estate would go to Corbin upon my death, and Priscilla would receive only a token amount in case of divorce. Now the situation has changed dramatically. Corbin had proven himself incapable of responsibility and caring for his loved ones. He did not deserve a $1 million inheritance, which he would spend on entertainment and dubious pleasures. It made much more sense to leave the money to Priscilla and Ethan, people who really needed the support and would use it for its intended purpose. At home, I took a quick shower, changed into clean clothes, and drank some strong coffee to perk myself up after a sleepless night. Then I dialed Harris's number, knowing that the lawyer was an early riser and had been working since 8 in the morning. "Robert, this is Clarence Tibbett. I need to amend my will right away." "Clarence, good morning. Congratulations on the birth of your grandson." I heard the news from the hospital nurse. "Thank you. It's the arrival of my grandson that's making me rethink my estate plans." "I see. When can you come over to discuss the details?" "Right away if you have time." Sure. I'll meet you at the office in half an hour." Harris's office was in the center of Slaughter Beach, in an old red brick building. The lawyer met me with a sympathetic look. Apparently, he knew not only about the birth of his grandson, but also about the father's absence at the birth. "Sit down, Clarence. Tell me what changes you want to make." "I want to disinherit Corbin outright. All the property should go to Priscilla and her son." Harris raised an eyebrow. Such radical decisions required serious reasons. "Can you explain the reasons?" "It's important for the court to understand the testator's motives." I told him about Corbin's behavior in recent months, about the affair with Vivian Preston, about the son's cynicism during the telephone conversation. Harris listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions and making notes in his notebook. "The situation is indeed serious," he agreed after my story. But total disinheritance can be challenged in court. Corbin is entitled to a compulsory share as your only child. Then reduce his share to the minimum provided by law. Leave the bulk of the estate to Priscilla and your grandson. That can be done. I also recommend setting up a trust fund for the boy so that the money cannot be spent until he is of age. We went over the details of the new will for over 2 hours. Corbin would receive only the small house I bought as an investment a few years ago and a token amount of $20,000. Everything else, the business, the main house, savings, securities, would go to Priscilla and Ethan. Additionally, an educational fund was created for the grandson, which ensured his education in the best schools and universities. The documents will be ready tomorrow evening, said Harris, finishing the registration. It will need the signatures of 2 witnesses and notarization. Get it done as soon as possible. I have a bad feeling about my son's future behavior. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt both relieved and sad at the same time. The decision was right and just, but it meant a final break with Corbin. I could no longer consider him my heir and the successor to the family business. The son I had loved and pampered for 35 years was a stranger, incapable of basic compassion for those closest to him. Corbin came home on Wednesday night, exactly 1 week after the birth of his son. I learned this from Tessa, who called me every day with reports on Priscilla and Ethan's condition. The young mother was recovering slowly. The C-section had been difficult, the stitches were sore, and the lack of sleep due to night feedings added to her fatigue. But she was happy with her baby and did not complain about the difficulties. All those days I visited them in the hospital twice a day, in the morning before work and in the evening after the office closed. I brought Priscilla home-cooked food, helped with the paperwork for the newborn, and bought necessary things. The hospital staff took me for a caring grandfather who was temporarily replacing the absent father. I did not dissuade them. The truth was too painful and humiliating. Ethan was growing up in front of my eyes. In a week, he had put on weight, his skin was less red and wrinkled, and his eyes were more meaningful. He recognized my voice and turned his head in my direction when I approached the crib. The nurses said it was a normal newborn reaction to familiar sounds, but I wanted to believe that my grandson really did remember me as a loved one. Priscilla asked about Corbin several times, and each time I had to invent new explanations for his absence. It was a sudden business trip, or important negotiations with investors, or problems with documents that delayed his return. Lying was getting harder and harder, especially when I saw her trying not to show disappointment and resentment. The young woman deserved honesty, but right now the truth could be detrimental to her health and mental state. On Monday, the will was ready. I arrived at Harris's with 2 witnesses, my accountant, George Flaming, and my secretary, Doris Coleman. Both had worked with me for many years and knew about the family problems, so they didn't ask too many questions. The document was voluminous, 12 pages of small print detailing all the property and the terms of inheritance. This option is virtually impossible to challenge in court, Harris assured me, putting the signed copies into a folder. You've clearly reasoned your decision, ensured that Corbin gets the minimum legal share, and that the bulk of the estate goes to the people who really need it. However, when will Corbin find out about the changes? After your death, unless you tell him yourself. Or you can notify him at any time. It's your right as a testator. I've decided not to tell my son about the disinheritance yet. First, I wanted to see his behavior after his return, to see if he could at least portray remorse and concern for the family. If not, then I would open the cards and explain the consequences of his actions. Priscilla was released from the hospital on Tuesday. I picked her and Ethan up and drove them home to Maple Street. The young mother looked frail and tired, carefully holding her son in her arms, afraid to hurt him with an awkward movement. Everything at home was ready for their arrival. I had bought a crib, a changing table, a supply of diapers and baby food. Thank you for everything, Clarence, Priscilla said as she settled into the nursing chair. I don't know what I would have done without your help. It's my responsibility. You carry my last name, and you gave birth to my grandson. Will Corbin be back soon? He promised to be home by Wednesday. The negotiations dragged on longer than planned. She nodded, but there was doubt in her eyes. Priscilla was a smart girl and was beginning to realize that something was wrong with her husband's explanations. A week's absence at the birth of her firstborn was beyond any business circumstances. But for now, she preferred not to ask direct questions, hoping to get clarification from Corbin himself. Wednesday morning, I arrived at the office as usual and tried to concentrate on work. But my thoughts kept returning to my upcoming meeting with my son. How would he explain his absence? Will he try to justify himself, or will he brazenly assert his right to privacy? Would he show at least a semblance of remorse, or would he continue to act as if nothing special had happened? Around 6 p.m., a familiar silver sedan pulled into the parking lot. Corbin looked rested and tanned, clearly having spent time on beaches rather than in meeting rooms. Expensive sunglasses, a fashionable shirt, the relaxed gait of a man who had just returned from vacation. No signs of guilt or shame for missing the birth of his son. He walked into my office with a wide smile and arms outstretched for a hug. "Hey, Dad! How's it going? I heard I have a son now." The feigned joy in his voice cut to the chase. Corbin talked about the birth of a child as if he had learned about it from a casual acquaintance, rather than missing the most important moment in the life of his family. "Yes, you have a son. His name is Ethan. It's a great name. I always wanted to name my firstborn that. It was a lie. The name was chosen by Priscilla, and Corbin only found out about it now." But he said the words with such conviction, as if he really participated in the discussion. How was Priscilla? Was the labor easy? The labor was difficult. She had an emergency C-section because of complications. The doctors talked about the risk to the life of the mother and child. A slight shadow of worry flickered across Corbin's face, but was quickly replaced by relief. "But it's all over, isn't it? The important thing is that the mother and child are healthy." "Yes, it did, but only because I got her to the hospital in time and agreed to the surgery." "Thank you, Dad. I knew I could count on you." Corbin sat down in the chair across from my desk and leaned back with a satisfied look. He really felt that his father was obligated to back him up while he was away, and he didn't see anything wrong with that. "Tell me about your trip. Where have you been this week?" "Philadelphia, like I said. I met with a group of investors who want to invest in the construction business. Very promising people with a lot of connections and capital." "What kind of investors? What are their names?" "Dad, you understand confidentiality. Until the negotiations are finalized, we can't reveal the names of the parties involved." "Was the hotel in Cancun confidential too?" Corbin turned pale and confused for a moment, then quickly pulled himself together and tried to portray bewilderment. "What hotel? What are you talking about?" "I know you were in Mexico with Vivian Preston. I know about your affair and that you flew out with her the day your wife gave birth." There was a long pause. Corbin studied my face, trying to figure out exactly how much I knew and whether I should continue my denial. In the end, I decided to partially confess, but to cast the information in a favorable light. "Okay, yes, I was in Mexico, but not alone, with a group of potential partners. Vivian works for a travel agency. She organized the trip and accompanied our delegation." "A two-person delegation?" "There were other participants. It's just that Vivian was the only one you could have known by sight." The lies became more and more elaborate, but Corbin held his ground. He'd been used to lying since childhood and had learned to do it convincingly, backing it up with plausible details. "Dad, I know you're upset that I wasn't there for Priscilla, but the trip had been planned for months. Money spent, contracts signed. I couldn't just cancel at the last minute. You could cancel anything to have your own baby." "I could have, but it would have been financial suicide. Investors don't understand family problems. They only care about your business reputation." "Family issues? You call having a son a family problem?" "No, of course not. I meant, you know, business people believe that personal lives shouldn't affect business decisions." Corbin said all this with a serious look, as if he really believed his own words. Perhaps he even convinced himself that he had done the right thing by sacrificing his family for his career. People are capable of amazing self-sacrifice when you need to justify selfish actions. And how did the negotiations go? Have the investors agreed to invest? "We're still discussing details, but the prospects are very good. If everything works out, we can expand the business several times over." "I see. Now tell me the truth. How long have you been seeing Vivian Preston?" Corbin tried to deny it again, but I interrupted him with a gesture. "Don't lie to me again. I know about your affair from people who have seen you together." I know you plan to get married after your divorce from Priscilla, so don't waste your time with any more fabrications. Realizing that denial was futile, Corbin changed tactics. He now tried to portray his affair as a natural reaction to marital problems. Okay, yes, there's something between us, but it's not what you think. It's just friendship, understanding. Vivian supports me through a difficult time in my life. What difficult time? Having a baby? Dad, you don't understand. Priscilla's been very, demanding, constant whining, complaining about how she's feeling, throwing tantrums about everything. I'm tired of it. She was pregnant. Of course she needed attention and care. I understand, but there are reasonable limits. You can't turn your husband into your personal servant just because you're expecting a child. The cynicism of those words shocked me. Corbin spoke of his pregnant wife as if she were a capricious mistress who makes excessive demands. In his mind, requests for help and support were unreasonable claims that interfered with his personal comfort. Surely Vivian makes no such demands. She's easy and simple. We understand each other. We have common interests, similar views on life. And a future together? Corbin was silent, realizing that he had gone too far in his revelations, but it was too late to retreat. I already knew enough to understand the true motives behind his behavior. Dad, I haven't made any final decisions. I'm just thinking about what's best for everyone. For everyone, or just for you? For everyone, honestly. Priscilla deserves a man who will truly love her. And I'm not sure I'm capable of that kind of love. Then why did you marry her? Why did you plan a child? Things were different then. I thought I could change, be more family-oriented. But it turns out it's not that simple. Corbin spoke of marriage and fatherhood as a failed experiment that could be terminated without serious consequences. In his mind, wife and child were temporary companions to be abandoned when they were no longer pleasurable. Corbin, you have a son, a child who needs a father. He will have a father. I'm not going to completely disappear from his life. But you're going to divorce his mother and marry another woman? Maybe, if it's the best thing for all parties. And you think you have the right to make those decisions alone? Dad, I'm a grown man. I'm entitled to my own personal happiness. Doesn't Priscilla have that right? And Ethan? Of course they do, but their happiness shouldn't be built on my unhappiness. Corbin's logic was astounding. He sincerely considered himself a victim of circumstances, which has the right to be released from inconvenient obligations. At the same time, he saw nothing wrong with abandoning his family for new entertainment. I realized that further conversation was pointless. Corbin was not going to admit his mistakes or change his behavior. He had returned from Mexico with the firm intention of continuing his affair with Vivian and gradually drifting away from his wife and child. A week's absence during labor was only the beginning of a long process of betraying his family. Go home to your wife and son, I said, rising from the table. At least try to pretend to be a happy father and a caring husband. Dad, don't be mad at me. I didn't mean for it to turn out this way. Whether you did or didn't doesn't matter. What matters is what you've done and what you plan to do next. Corbin left with a puzzled look. He had expected to receive his father's forgiveness and understanding, as he had in the past. My cold attitude and unwillingness to justify his actions had taken him by surprise. But he had not yet made serious conclusions. He was used to the fact that Daddy sooner or later softens and forgives any wrongdoing. This time it would be different. Corbin has crossed a line beyond which there is no forgiveness. He betrayed his pregnant wife at the most crucial moment, showed monstrous callousness to his newborn child, and did not even try to justify himself or repent. Such a man deserved no inheritance, no family, and no respect from others. Thursday morning, I decided not to go to the office. After my conversation with Corbin yesterday, it was finally clear that he was not going to change or admit his mistakes. On the contrary, his son planned to continue living a double life, playing the caring family man when necessary, but continuing his affair with Vivian and preparing for his divorce from Priscilla. This behavior demanded an immediate response. Instead of traveling to work, I went to Priscilla's house to check on her and Ethan. The young mother was still recovering from surgery. She was moving cautiously, tired quickly, but she was performing her maternal duties with amazing dedication. Night feedings every 3 hours, changing diapers, bathing, playing with the baby. All this required a huge physical and emotional cost. Corbin was home when I arrived, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and leafing through the newspaper like a normal husband on a normal morning. He looked rested and content. The tan from the Mexican sun made him look younger, and the satisfaction of a man who had recently had a good time shone in his eyes. No signs of fatigue from a night on duty with the baby or caring for his recovering wife. "Hi, Dad," he greeted me with ostentatious joy. "How are things at work?" "Not working today. I thought I'd check in on the family." "Good for you. Family is the most important thing in life." These words sounded especially cynical coming from a man who a week ago was having fun with his mistress while his wife was giving birth to his child. But Corbin said them with such conviction, as if he really believed what he was saying. Priscilla came out of the nursery with Ethan in her arms. The boy had grown over the week and had become more active, turning his head at sounds, focusing his eyes on bright objects, sometimes even trying to smile. Motherhood transformed Priscilla. Despite the fatigue and post-operative weakness, she was glowing with a special happiness. "Look, Clarence, how he has grown," she said cheerfully. "Yesterday he weighed 4 kilograms and 100 grams. He's a real big boy, and he's so smart, he recognizes voices." Yes. When Corbin speaks, Ethan immediately turns to him. He senses his daddy. I looked at my son, who pretended to admire the child's behavior. Corbin was smiling and saying gentle words, but there was no genuine concern or affection in his eyes. He was playing the role of a loving father because that's what those around him expected of him. But every movement looked fake. Every word sounded fake. "Oh, how did you sleep last night?" I asked Priscilla. "He woke up 3 times for feeding, but he behaved calmly, didn't get cranky." "Did Corbin help?" "Of course he did," answered the son quickly, changing diapers, rocking him in his arms when he cried. It was a lie, and Priscilla knew it. I could see it in her face, a slight shadow of embarrassment, a quick glance at her husband, an uncertain smile. Corbin spent the first night home, sleeping soundly in the marital bed while his wife handled the newborn alone. But she didn't expose him, perhaps hoping he would become more attentive and caring over time. "Ethan looks a lot like Daddy," Priscilla said as she gently handed the baby to Corbin. The same chin, the same shape of the ears. Corbin took his son in his arms tentatively, holding him as if he were afraid of breaking him or getting him dirty. Ethan whimpered at the uncomfortable position, but his father didn't understand what was wrong and simply shifted the child back to his mother. "He must be hungry," Corbin muttered. "Or wet." "No, you just weren't holding him right. You have to hold his head and his back at the same time." "Oh, I see. I'm not used to it yet. It'll take time to learn." But I could see that Corbin had no desire to learn. He saw fatherhood as a temporary nuisance to be endured until he could get rid of it. The child was to him a nuisance, a source of noise and extra expense, not the joy and meaning of life. After breakfast, I suggested that Corbin take a walk. We needed to talk to him alone, without witnesses. We went out into the courtyard and walked slowly down the quiet street, past neat houses with front gardens. Slaughter Beach was waking up. Children were going to school, adults were driving to work, retirees were walking their dogs. The usual peaceful life of a small town where everyone knew each other and lived by unwritten rules of decorum. "Corbin, there's something I need to tell you about your future." "Yeah? What's that?" "I've changed my will. You're no longer my heir." My son stopped like a stumbling block and stared at me in bewilderment. He was silent for a few seconds, probably trying to figure out if he'd heard me correctly. "What do you mean?" "I mean what I said. The business, the house, the savings, all of it will go to Priscilla and Ethan. You'll only get the bare minimum required by law." "Dad, this is a joke, right? You can't disinherit me because of one mistake." "One mistake? You call betraying your pregnant wife one mistake?" Corbin laughed nervously and rubbed his forehead with the palm of his hand. He still couldn't believe I was serious. "Look, I know what I did wasn't very nice, but it's okay. Priscilla's healthy, the baby's healthy, the family's safe. Why go to such extreme measures? Family intact? You're planning a divorce so you can marry Vivienne Preston. Who told you that? I never said anything about a divorce," Shinanamorum, don't lie to me. Vivian's been telling a friend about your plans. The whole town will soon know about it. Corbin turned pale, realizing that his secret was out. But instead of remorse, his eyes burned with anger at those who had betrayed his plans. Talkative fool, I told her not to tell anyone yet. So it's true? Are you really going to leave your family? Dad, you don't understand the situation. I'm not happy with Priscilla. We're different people. We have no common interests. I have a completely different relationship with Vivian. You have a child with Priscilla. That creates an obligation, regardless of your feelings for the mother. I'll pay child support, visit my son on weekends. But I can't sacrifice my whole life for one youthful mistake. Mistake of youth, he called marriage to a good girl and the birth of a healthy child. At 35, Corbin still considered himself a young man who had the right to experiment and find himself. Corbin, you want to get a divorce, that's your right. But then don't count on my support and inheritance. You can't do this. I'm your only son. That's why it pains me so much to admit how you've grown up. We reached a small park in the center of the neighborhood and sat on a bench under an old oak tree. Corbin nervously lit a cigarette, a habit he hadn't kicked since college. His hands trembled and his eyes darted from side to side. Dad, listen to me carefully. I realize I've disappointed you, but people change, make mistakes, seek their happiness. Don't I have a right to a personal life? Yes, you do, but not at the expense of other people. I'm not cheating anyone. I just want to live honestly, not pretend to be a happy family man. Then why did you get married? Why did you plan to have a child? I thought differently then. I thought that I should follow conventional standards, get married, have children, become a respectable member of society. But it wasn't for me. What was for you? Resorts with mistresses? Why not? I earn money. I have the right to spend it on my pleasures. Sherisharnam, you work in my company and get a salary that is 3 times your real contribution to the business? But I'm your heir. Or was, until you went crazy. There was a note of menace in his voice. Corbin was beginning to realize that disinheritance was not an empty threat, but a serious decision, and that frightened him far more than the prospect of divorce or public condemnation. Corbin, I'm not crazy. I've just opened your eyes to your true nature. My true nature? What did you want me to be? A boring clerk who stays in an office all his life and enjoys every dollar he makes? I wanted to be an honest, responsible man. A man who takes responsibility for his actions and takes care of his loved ones. Those are your values, not mine. I don't want to live up to your standards. Then don't count on my money. Corbin finished his cigarette and nervously stomped the butt with his heel. Then he turned to me and tried to change the tone of the conversation from aggressive to pathetic. Dad, what are you doing? We're a family. We have to support each other. Yes, I made a mistake. But is that a reason to cut ties? You didn't make a mistake. You made a conscious choice to betray your family for your own personal pleasure. All right, so be it. But why should I suffer? Priscilla will get alimony. Her son will be provided for. And I'm supposed to be left with nothing? You'll be left with what you've earned, and the inheritance will go to the people who deserve it. Deserving? What did Priscilla do to deserve millions? She's been a faithful wife and a good mother. And most importantly, she's honest, unlike you. Corbin jumped up from the bench and started pacing nervously on the path. I could see him struggling with various emotions: anger, fear, despair. He was used to taking his inheritance for granted and couldn't imagine life without that financial safety cushion. Dad, you don't understand the situation. If I stay with Priscilla, I'll be miserable, and an unhappy man can't be a good husband and father. You're no longer a good husband and father, and it's not unhappiness, it's selfishness. It's not selfishness, it's wanting to live life to the fullest, at the expense of other people. Priscilla is young, beautiful. She'll find another husband who will love her for real. With a child in her arms, after the betrayal of her first husband? She will. And I'll help her financially. What financially? You won't have any money to help if you lose your inheritance. Corbin stopped and stared at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was pure hatred, the cold, calculating malice of a man who had lost what he thought was rightfully his. You want to destroy me, don't you? To avenge me for not living up to your expectations? I want to protect innocent people from your cruelty. Innocent people? Priscilla chose me to be her husband. No one forced her. She chose you because she didn't know your true nature. Did you? If I'm so terrible, why didn't you stop our wedding? Because I hoped you'd change. That fatherhood would make you a better person. And did it fulfill your hopes? Corbin grinned sarcastically. No, you're worse than I thought. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Corbin smoked a second cigarette and considered what he had heard. Then he tried one last time to change my mind, using manipulative techniques familiar from his childhood. Dad, remember what I was like as a kid? Cheerful, kind, obedient? Don't you love your only son more? I do, but love doesn't mean indulging every whim. This is not a whim. This is my life. It's mine too. I don't want my money to go to a man who uses it to hurt the people I care about. All right, said Corbin, suddenly calm, throwing out his cigarette butt. Then I'll contest the will in court. Try it. The lawyer warned me that the document was well drafted and it would be difficult to challenge it. I'll find other lawyers. I'll prove that you made your decision out of emotion, that you weren't in your right mind. I have witnesses to your behavior. Tessa, hospital nurses, phone records. And I have money for good lawyers. What money? Your salary? It's barely enough to cover my operating expenses. I'll find investors, borrow from friends. What friends? Who wants to get involved with a man who's abandoned his family and is suing his father for his inheritance? Corbin realized he'd backed himself into a corner. He really didn't have the resources for a lengthy legal battle, and his reputation as a traitor didn't add to his chances of getting financial support from others. Dad, you can't be so cruel. I'm your blood, your continuation. You're my disappointment. And the sooner you realize that, the better for everyone. We walked back to Priscilla's house in silence. At the gate, Corbin stopped and tried again to change my mind. Sumner, all right. Let's say I deserve to be punished. But why disinherit me altogether? Leave me at least half and give the rest to my wife and son. No. A quarter? You'll get what's legally due. $20,000 in a small house on the outskirts of town. That's nothing. You can't start a new life with that money, but you can try to do better. Corbin walked into the house with a grim look on his face. I could see him trying to hide his condition from Priscilla, pretending to be in his usual mood. But his eyes betrayed his anger at me and at the world that had suddenly ceased to obey his wishes. Now I knew what my son was really like. Not a frivolous egoist who could be re-educated, but a complete consumer who believed that the world was obliged to provide his comfort. A man with no conscience, no sympathy for his loved ones, no basic understanding of responsibility. And such a man should never have been given control of a family business or a large inheritance. For the next 3 weeks, Corbin behaved like a hunted animal. He no longer tried to play the loving husband and caring father. The mask fell, and everyone saw his true face. In the house on Maple Street, there was a heavy atmosphere of mutual reproach and cold silence. Priscilla did not understand what was happening to her husband, but felt that their marriage is breaking down right before her eyes. Corbin stopped even pretending to be interested in his son. When Ethan cried at night, his father defiantly covered his head with a pillow and demanded that Priscilla faster soothe the child. When asked to help with household chores, he responded irritably, referring to important matters and fatigue at work. Although he showed up at the office less and less often and worked worse and worse, Doris complained to me several times about his behavior. Corbin would arrive at 11 in the morning, sit in his office until lunchtime, then disappear until evening on various pretexts. He was reluctant to serve clients, filled out documents with mistakes, was late for meetings or did not show up at all. It seemed as if he was no longer interested in his work. He was just doing his hours to get his paycheck. Mr. Tibbet, Doris said to me gently on Monday morning, there's something wrong with your son. He's become distant, angry. Yesterday, he was rude to Mrs. Patterson, who wanted to hire a backhoe to build an extension. What exactly did he say? That we didn't have time to deal with small customers, that we had better things to do than dig holes for housewives. The poor woman left in tears. Mrs. Patterson had been a regular customer for 10 years. She rented out apartments and regularly did repairs in her homes. renting equipment from us. To lose a customer like that to Corbin's rudeness was unforgivably stupid. I'll call her back and apologize, I promised Doris, and warn Corbin. One more stunt like that, and he'll be out of a job. I'm afraid he doesn't care. He's acting like he doesn't need anything anymore. Doris was right. Corbin held himself like a man who knows he's about to retire and sees no point in trying. He was angry at the world, but most of all at me for disinheriting him. In his mind, I had done him a terrible injustice by taking away what was his by birthright. On Wednesday, Corbin finally decided to have an open conversation with his wife. I learned about it from Tessa, who stopped by Priscilla in the evening and found her friend in tears. The young mother was sitting on the living room couch, rocking a crying Ethan in her arms and recounting what had happened. "He said he didn't love me anymore," Tessa sobbed, relaying the content of the conversation. "That he'd married by mistake, and now he wanted to make up for that mistake. That he was planning a divorce and a new life with another woman. Did he give you the name of this woman?" "Vivian Preston. Priscilla knows her by sight. She's been to your office a few times on family matters." Corbin picked the worst possible moment for a revelation. Priscilla was still recovering from a difficult labor, breastfeeding her baby in need of support and care. To hear about her husband's betrayal in such a state was a real blow to her. How did she react? At first, she didn't believe it. I thought Corbin was depressed or having a nervous breakdown. I suggested seeing a doctor, seeing a marriage counselor, but he explained that he made a conscious decision and he was going to stick to it. What about Ethan? Corbin said he'd visit his son and pay child support, but he can't live with them anymore because it interferes with his personal happiness. I imagined how those words sounded to a young mother who had recently made plans for a future together. Corbin had destroyed her world coldly and calculatingly, showing no sympathy or regret for the pain he had caused. On Friday, Corbin didn't show up for work. Doris called him several times, but his phone was unavailable. By lunchtime, I went to his house and found the house empty. No Corbin or his belongings. Priscilla was sitting in the kitchen with her eyes red from crying, feeding Ethan from a bottle. "He left last night," she said quietly. "He packed a suitcase and said he wasn't coming back here, that he'd get an apartment in another neighborhood and start a new life." "Did he leave an address? Phone number?" "Said he'd get in touch with his lawyers about divorce and alimony. In the meantime, he wants to be alone and think things over." Of course, there was no thinking. Corbin just moved in with Vivian and enjoyed a honeymoon with his new lover. He abandoned his family without explanation or remorse, like a tired toy. "Priscilla, what are you going to do now?" "I don't know. The apartment was rented in his name. Mrs. Patterson can demand to move out. I have 2 more months of maternity leave, then I have to go back to work." "Who am I going to leave Ethan with?" "Don't worry about that. I'll help with housing and money." "Clarence, that's very kind of you, but I can't be your dependent." "Us, you're not dependent. You're the mother of my grandson, which makes you part of our family." Ethan lay in her arms and sucked peacefully on a bottle, unaware that his father had abandoned them. The boy grew even more. He became more active, more inquisitive, began to smile in response to affectionate words. A beautiful, healthy child who deserved a loving father, but got an indifferent egoist. On Monday, an unfamiliar middle-aged man in an expensive suit came to my office. He introduced himself as Attorney Daniel Croft and said he was representing Corbin Tibbet in a matter of probate law. "My client intends to contest the new will and regain his rightful share of the inheritance," he said in an official tone. "On what grounds?" The will was made under the influence of immediate emotions, without taking into account the long-term interests of the family. In addition, there is reason to believe that the testator was misled about his son's behavior. Croft was an experienced lawyer and knew his business, but I also had a good lawyer who anticipated such attempts and prepared a solid defense. "I have documentary evidence of all the circumstances that led to the change in the will," I replied calmly. "Telephone records, witness statements, medical reports on the sister-in-law's condition. Nevertheless, we will try to prove the illegality of disinheritance." "Try, but I warn you, it's going to be a long and expensive trial." Croft left with a puzzled look. Apparently, he'd hoped for a quick settlement, but was rebuffed. Corbin failed to take into account that a serious legal war requires a lot of money, which he did not have. The next 2 months were spent in litigation. Corbin tried to prove that I had made my decision under the influence of emotion and incomplete information. He brought in witnesses who would attest to his positive qualities as a son and father. But all his attempts broke down on irrefutable facts. Tapes of conversations from Mexico, the testimony of medical staff of the hospital, the testimony of neighbors. Harris defended my interest brilliantly. He presented to the court a complete picture of Corbin's behavior, from an affair with his mistress to fleeing the house on the day of his son's birth. The judge listened to all the arguments and ruled in my favor. The will was found to be legal and valid. Mr. Tibbet Jr. gets the minimum share required by law, the judge announced. The bulk of the inheritance goes to the testator's daughter-in-law and grandson, according to his will. Corbin lost the trial and was left with no money for an appeal. Croft demanded immediate payment for his services, but the son could not pay even for the initial consultation. He had to sell his car and go into debt to pay off the lawyer. In August, I heard a rumor that Corbin was going to leave Slaughter Beach. Tessa saw him and Vivian loading things into a rented van outside her apartment. Neighbors said the young couple planned to move to Florida, where Vivian had relatives. I didn't try to stop my son or interfere with his plans. Let him leave. There's nothing more for him to do here. His reputation was completely ruined, his money was running out, and there were no job prospects. In another state, he could try to start a new life, although I doubted his ability to change. In September, Corbin did leave. He didn't say goodbye to me, didn't visit his son, didn't even leave a forwarding address. He just disappeared from our lives as if he never existed. The last time I saw him was at the courthouse when the judgment in the estate case was read. His face was grim and angry, and his eyes were hollow with hatred for his father who had ruined his plans. Priscilla was taking the divorce and her husband's departure hard, but gradually she began to recover and make plans for the future. I helped her buy a small house in a good neighborhood, put Ethan in the best kindergarten in the city, opened an educational account for my grandson. The young woman returned to work at the kindergarten, but no longer as a simple teacher, but as head. I negotiated with the city authorities on her promotion. Ethan grew up a healthy and cheerful child. By a year, he began to walk. By a year and a half, to speak simple words. A very intelligent and curious boy who was interested in everything around him. He did not remember his father and did not miss him. Corbin left too early to leave a trace in the child's memory. Sometimes I wondered if I had done the right thing in disinheriting my son. Maybe I should have given him another chance. Tried to change his mind, tried to find a compromise. But then I looked at Ethan and Priscilla and realized that I had made the only possible choice. The money had gone to those who needed it, not to someone who thought they were entitled to it. Corbin showed his true colors at the most crucial moment. He betrayed his pregnant wife, abandoned his newborn son, lied to his father, and tried to avoid responsibility for his actions. Such a man deserved no inheritance, no respect, and no forgiveness. He made his choices and received the consequences. I had no illusions about a happy ending. Priscilla would remain a single mother, Ethan would grow up without a father, and I would never see a worthy heir to my business. But justice has been served. The good people have been protected and supported, and the bad have been punished for their actions. In our imperfect world, that's a lot. The business continued to work, clients received quality services, employees received their salaries correctly. In a few years, I plan to sell the company and put the money in Ethan's trust fund. Let the boy decide how to dispose of his inheritance when he became an adult. Hopefully, he would be a better man than his father.